this was your question. But everything will start to cluster under the threshold of active recognition because the mind is there most of the time. So everything is being assembled below the threshold of active recognition. And so our other triangle, we have intelligence. Knowledge. And wisdom. Ultimately, desire and intelligence for many, many people isn't passing through the center of personal power, and it's not connected to intelligence. So, Jerry, if a person is operating below the threshold of active recognition, what is influencing them? What are they feeding?
Oh,
using our bridge
just
terms
those,
here.
yeah, just sounds like repetitive habit,
Yeah,
just mindless or just repetitive.
yeah. We would call that the nemesis. So the mind that is below the threshold of active recognition is feeding the nemesis, and that will charge the destroyers. So where do you think most people's desire is coming from?
Everything you just said.
Everything I just said. So most desire is coming from the biological destroyer, the entertainment destroyer, the habits that we've created already, and the social destroyer. And then so the desires are centered around that. And so the intention is always going to follow the desire, but very likely it's all below the threshold of active recognition and it's not very clear. Does that make sense? How could it be clear when, it's unfocused, it's all over the place? Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm listening. When I use that word, I had no direction. I wasn't going to try to, add my stuff to it. So I'm listening. You're telling me about intention.
Yes. Yeah, you put a word up there, so I'm going to tell you about it. Now, what we do in our practice is we spend our time above the threshold of active recognition, which means that our triangles and the circle around the triangle, if there is a circle around it, that's hydrostasy. These triangles come together, they get closer, and eventually they almost overlap. Very difficult to draw a picture that way because then it just looks like a bunch of gobbledygook. That's why I put the circle around it to imply that they're basically overlapping. And then before you know it, desire and intelligence are lined up. So when we talk about setting intention, it is very difficult to do if you don't even know the desire or even where the desire is coming from. Does that make sense? So that's a big issue when it comes to setting intention, is that somebody will try to set the intention, but they're not even clear on the desire, and they're definitely not going to be able to access the power of will, because there's something that can interfere with the power of will. What interferes with the power of will?
No intention, or it would produce sort of wishy-washy results.
Distractions.
That's
Yes,
true.
because your
Yeah.
attention's going all over the place rather than focused and a laser point.
Sure. Yeah. And Donna pointed that out. That goes along with what you're saying, Ida, but ultimately it's the first enemy of knowledge, which is distraction. So if a person is distracted from the present moment, then they're not going to be able to access the power of will, not as easily. For example, the dishes. They walk up to the dishes and they start to produce interference. Producing interference, getting in their own way, and now the dishes are a problem. So that's what's going on a lot of times when somebody is trying to set intention, or they're just trying to directly access will without understanding their own desire, without understanding their own intentions, and then just going straight to the power of will. That looks like the male mind, the aggressive male mindset that is using, it's basically a power of will because they've done it, they've manipulated, their whole lives. So they're pretty good at it, or at least they think they are. And the desire and the intention are all below the threshold of active recognition. And so the aggressive male mind is trying to get what it wants, and it's not even aware of the dynamic at all. The desire, intention, and will. The desire is to manipulate, so the intention is to, by any means necessary, subtly get what they want. Does that make sense, or does that sound familiar?
It makes sense. I've got one for women. And it still astounds me. It's the whole marriage, wedding, family, children thing. It is a social construct that is programmed in, I can't say programmed, whatever. It's a cultural construct that we agreed to as young children. So it's the man on the horse, that all the stories, they're just starting to make Disney stories that don't end in the man and the woman riding away and the marriage and the, ending in that construct. And so the wedding becomes an insane thing. And I watch young women do it over and over again. They need the engagement, and they need the pictures for the engagement, and they need the proposal pictures, and they are, by the time they get to their wedding, they're a nervous mess, and they've spent shitloads of money that they can't afford for the wedding. And it's all about the wedding. And so many of them are divorced in a year because nobody's talking about the marriage and what marriage is. So what is the desire? Where's the desire? What's the intention? Where is it coming from? And it ends up to be a mass of distractions and, oh my God, just funds wasted, energy wasted, tons of pictures and everybody. I always forget to ask. People go, oh, I got engaged. And I go, oh, congratulations. And everybody goes, where's the ring? Like they want to see the ring. I never think to ask. I'm supposed to want to see the ring and measure the size of the diamond against whoever last got engaged and what their size diamond was. And the whole thing is an amazing mess. To me, it's like a giant clusterfuck. I don't understand it. I can't comprehend it, but women do it too. It's not just a man thing. And it's all based on social construct. And
yeah, it sounds social, cultural, not just women. This is a cultural, societal thing there.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is. I think Jerry sometimes, Donna will give the example from a woman's perspective because that's her perspective. That's why I'll typically talk about the male mind, because I got one and I'm very familiar with it. But
Yeah.
You're right. It definitely stretches across the group. It's not a man thing or a woman thing or a gender thing for sure. But Jerry, what we're saying implies that self-awareness isn't really there. Because also some people, when they refer to self-awareness, it's just like everything else. It's abstract. It's just knowing some shit about yourself. That's self-awareness. That most people don't typically mean it in an active sense, meaning the way that we use it. The way that we talk about everything is in the active sense, meaning that it's a part of your present moment. That's one of I call it the cornerstones of Qigong, is that one of the cornerstones is that you have impeccable self-awareness. Sensory attention training, you're aware of your own senses, your body. Cognitive attention training, you're aware of your own cognition. Behavioral attention training, so you're aware of your behaviors and your output. That's what we do. And then eventually the desire, intention, and will dynamic becomes a part of something more active. And the biggest difference in the way that I'll present hunting power is that the mechanism for success in terms of intention and will be directly proportional to the personal power that you have at that time. So you can give yourself a break and you can just wait and continue to gain more alignment, gain more visceralness of that thing that I call personal power, which is connection. It's going with the flow. It's the active adaptability. We talk about that. So ultimately, we get really good at being present enough to understand where our desire is at in the moment. And then that will lead towards the intention and then the will. So Setting intention is usually something that people do as a mechanism of force. Usually, you can still set intention all you want to, but where is intention usually set? It's usually set in an imaginary future. We're usually saying this is what we're going to do in the future. Well, in the hydrostasy practice, and specifically when we get into hunting power, and remember, it's in hydrostasy, so we have at least one point of attention at all times. We get much more familiar with self-awareness, and we even get familiar with the feeling of personal power. And so we can learn how to access it, find the feeling, and then go into your intention in the moment. Does that make sense? Intention outside of the moment is that kind of just fades away because you're not entertaining psychological time. So where is my intention now? Is that leading towards my plan? Fine. That's as far as I would go with the imaginary future, is a plan that is either unfolding now. And if there's nothing to do with the plan, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to think about. There's nothing to entertain. I don't need to consider intention and will one iota. So let's say, Jerry, that you want to quit eating ice cream. And the reason you want to quit eating ice cream is because your doctor told you that you need to quit eating ice cream. So you have a good reason. Ice cream isn't making you feel well anymore. Maybe you're getting a little sensitive to dairy. And now you have a desire. The ultimate desire is to be healthier, to live longer, right? So you know that, but there's no ice cream in front of you right now. So there's no reason to give it any intellectual or cognitive energy whatsoever, because there's no ice cream in the room. You're not at the grocery store waiting to select something. But what you can do, especially if you're hunting power, is to throughout the day make your cognitive attention on your personal power. That is tricky in the beginning. It's impossible before hydrostasy. Oh, I don't know if it's impossible, but it's not probable. And yeah. Is this making sense so far, Jerry? I'm kind of giving an example of without the
Yeah.
practice, with the practice.
Yeah, no, I'm listening. I
Okay.
like it.
Okay, cool. So assuming that we're practicing, we are doing our hunting power, which means if we're doing our hunting power, we are impeccably self-aware in the moment, and we're paying attention to that feeling of personal power. And then when the ice cream presents itself, you've already been practicing. You already have momentum with personal power. And then the habit will either fall away, it won't feel desirable, or you'll give in to the habit and we'll wait for next time. But we won't leak power, so we won't get down on ourselves because we didn't beat ourselves up for the whole day setting these erroneous intentions into the future. So the bottom line is that the more that we pay attention to how we feel, which is what hydrostasy is all about, the more we pay attention to it's like a density almost, sometimes with peripheral vision and expanding, we have an expansion in our Qigong practice, but we also have a type of condensing into what would seem like an infinitely dense point. That's where personal power is. Does that make sense? And it is in the Dantian area. That's a good place to put it, or put your attention so that you can pay attention to it. And then you're about to go get the ice cream, and then it just doesn't feel good. It feels out of alignment. What did we say about basic Freudian psychology? Eventually, we won't want to do what doesn't feel good, and we'll start to go towards things that feel better. But we're doing it deliberately, intentionally, and willfully. Now, personal power in this practice will build automatically. Why do you think that personal power in the Qigong practice starts building on day one? As long as we're redirecting if you eat the ice cream and you didn't have the personal power in that moment to drop it, it didn't feel like this is the moment to drop it, you're good. You'll have another opportunity, but definitely no leaking power. That's an opposite thing. That's going in an opposite direction. So by hydrostasy, I'm assuming that we can redirect leaking power like that, like it's not even going to occur. All that makes sense. Didn't I ask a question there? Was I asking a question?
I don't know, but I was just going to make a comment that as I'm listening to your words and when I feel my personal power in that way, there's a relaxing, a relaxing that I was relating to that just around this whole ice cream thing. I mean, let's just don't blow it up into something it's not. Okay. There's a relaxing with it, just no force. Whatever it is you're doing with your personal power in your day. I don't need to be thinking about ice cream all day, but I know exactly what you meant. Now you said it. Yeah.
Yep.
You asked a
Think your
question and you
question-
answered it.
your que-
It was
Yes,
leaking
sorry.
power.
No, you were going to ask, why do you think in the beginning of the
Oh, yeah.
Zhang practice, something about that?
Yeah. What is the mechanism that's building intention and will? Or I guess I just gave you the answer. My fault. What is building personal power?
I don't know, intention and will.
There you go. But
Or not,
okay,
non-interference, not interfering, getting out of your own way, that sort of thing.
yeah, I would say that getting out of our own way, not interfering by using the practice. But if you're doing your practice, is that not an act of intention and will? Just doing your basic practice, even in the beginning of Qigong, when you're just coming back to the present moment, is that not something that you intended to do and then you followed through and you did it? So that is shortening the gap between intention and will to the point where everything is just new energy. And there will be some points of reason that I will provide when I write the Qigong book about hunting power, because you can remind yourself that you took decades and decades and decades, depending on who it is, maybe even decades and decades, to build these habits. They have below the threshold unconscious momentum. And you can give yourself a break. Like Jerry said, you can relax around it. What people often do is they turn everything into an intellectual exercise. Now we need to think about it. We need to plan. We need to understand. We need to, again, think about it. And that's what Ida said. That's the opposite of what Ida said, actually. That is the interference, and the personal power won't flow with that. And we're completely cut off to everything else around us, which is where personal power exists, where the opportunity to accumulate more momentum and alignment with it exists. So everything is happening now.
In the past, I would have analyzed it to death.
Yes, I can see that. And then ultimately that gets in your own way, and that sets you up for not just do energy. So what we do in counterbalance, even in basic alignment, is we want to start our practice right away. The moment we wake up. When you're hunting power, you check into personal power right away. You check into that Dantian area and you keep your attention on it and you feel your personal power grow. And it feels like confidence, it feels like knowing, but it's not a belief because you don't have to convince anybody and you don't have to convince yourself. So it has a different flavor than belief will have. Does that make sense? And then ultimately, when we start shifting our lens of perception, desire changes fundamentally. Because you've changed your lens of perception fundamentally. So the desire is a form of output. You know, what do you want to put out? That's your desire. What do you want to take in? You know, that's another form of desire. And that all is influenced when you change your lens of perception. And I don't know exactly how it will change for each person. So I'm not interested in making predictions necessarily, but it will be closer to intelligence. It will be better for everybody. It will contain the 3 W's typically. Or it gets closer to the 3 W's. The win for everybody can be a tricky one sometimes, but does that make sense?
It does. Intention has a very different definition
within the practice, within this practice, within a present moment practice, a deliberate practice, than it does outside of it. That's why Tony Robbins, for example, he may have a way of achieving goals, he has deconstructed and reconstructed the path that he follows toward achieving goals, like feeding this many people on Thanksgiving or whatever one of his many goals was. And if you're operating below the level of recognition, if you don't even know where your desire comes from, if you're not, if you haven't accumulated any personal power from presence, then that following that prescription feels a lot like force. However, if you have practiced, it's a viable way of achieving a goal that you've set. But your goals, your intention, and about those goals, and your intention and will is already accumulated. So it's a just do energy that gets you there. Following the formula is it's just a formula. You're still practicing. So your intention depends, the definition of the word intention depends on the lens. How clear is the lens you're looking through when you set that intention? So, Jerry asked a simple question, but the answer isn't necessarily simple. It depends on through which lens you're looking at. Whether intention can feel like force, and whether it's easily dropped, or whether you can have just do energy around that intention.
Yeah, and Anthony Robbins uses the term personal power, and he helps you set up intention and will. He'll have you pick something that you've been wanting to do, and you have to do it every day for a week before you can move on in his program. And then you do something else, and you do it every day for a week before you move on, and so on and so forth. And that's great to an extent. But what this practice does is it also takes into account that desire in general is being heavily influenced by the four destroyers, and it is extremely unreliable. And this practice takes responsibility for that fact. And rather than offering things that help you manifest and help you get what you want, let's first cleanse the lens of perception and see what do we really want. And that's an element that isn't as prevalent because it's also more difficult to sell. If somebody's like, oh, can you help me manifest? And I'm like, yes, but first we need 10 years of focusing our intention and will into the present moment to accumulate personal power, to clear the lens of perception, to get out of your own way before you can even begin to understand desires that are beneficial for you.
Sure. And or to even identify, where did that thought come from? Was that an inspired thought? Did it come from a relaxed mind, and was I in a balanced place? Or did it come from just years of habitual, repetitive, all the things that we discuss? And I still uncover those after all of this time. I still go, what? Like, I say something as if it's just a fact or the truth even about myself, and then I go, why is that necessarily so? Where did that come from? And just because you've said it a million times. So do you like that? Do you want that? Is that present? Like, how do you feel about that now through this lens of perception? And if you don't, then you change it going forward. You're just more aware of it. Now it's in the bubble of perception. And then
Did you put it?
back to the practice. So that's Jerry's relaxed. I'm relaxed about it. I don't have to, and Ida's, I don't have to go down the rabbit hole of thinking it and tracing it back to, because my mother always told me this, or maybe I'll look back and go, oh yeah, that's where that came from. But I don't need to find it in order to change it. I just need to practice, just practice.
Mhm.
And then it won't, that thought will suddenly, not suddenly, will eventually feel not right. That's not sitting right with me. Like that doesn't feel in balance with everything else I'm doing. So then I can see that it is not an inspired thought. It's a habitual, repetitive one that I've always carried.
Yeah, that's true. And just like the ice cream thing is probably, being triggered at a certain time of day and a certain thought. That's
Mhm.
why you're going for the ice cream. But anyway, did you just put a 10-year timeline on that, Ernest? 10 years?
No, no, not really. I don't,
No, not really.
that's not like a
Yeah.
hard set timeline, but for
Yeah, I
some
don't think we're
reason,
doing that here, are we? We're not really going to set timelines, are we?
no, I don't think
Yeah.
timelines are necessary because everybody comes into the practice different. But I just said 10 years to give the impression that this isn't necessarily an overnight thing, and a lot of people in the world today, they want quick fixes. They want a pill, they want a prescription, they want a magic trick. This idea that I'm going to read that one sentence, I'm going to hear this one thing from this one person.
Or a 30-day course, 30 days, you'll be
Exactly.
balanced.
Yeah.
But at the same time, let's don't, you know, set limits on our energy and, I mean, there's people out there that, they come to some class and some just clicks with them.
it can click.
They're able to
Yeah.
put it together. I mean, let's let them have
No,
it. I don't need a timeline. Is all
no,
I'm saying.
you don't need a timeline, Jerry, but one thing is that it doesn't matter how much this practice clicks, you have to do it. That's the biggest difference. A lot of people, they're steeped in intellectualism and thought and trying to figure things out, that when they think they have that one sentence, now they're doing backflips, and we're trying to sell our enthusiasm, and we're doing all of that. But my point in saying that is that it requires the energy of momentum. Momentum is a result of doing the practice, and it will take some time because we're dealing with energy dynamics. So if somebody has had decades of accumulated below the active level of active recognition, threshold of active recognition, they might not need an equal amount of time, of course, but it still is an energy dynamic. They have to overcome that momentum, in a manner of speaking. So it can take time. And I think that's just setting a realistic expectation to say that, hey, this is not going to be an overnight thing. You're not going to go from remember or forgetting all the time to remembering all the time, master mountain climber, just because it clicks. It may click, but you got to do it. And then in doing it, it gains momentum. And then that's something that we can talk more about. And then I'll be able to see it in their behavior. So if you and I hang out, Jerry, and your mind isn't peaceful, your attitude isn't calm, your emotions aren't balanced, and you have no self-awareness, then I know damn well you're not really doing your practice, no matter how much you say it clicks. Do you see what I mean? So there are some physical
Well, maybe
derivatives.
maybe click wasn't the word, but I guess how sometimes somebody, they have an awareness. It's like, gosh, I never thought about that. You
Yeah.
have an awareness, and I get the doing. I do. I'm not saying anything against that. Just
Mm.
I was just surprised to hear you say 10 years.
I
You
just
used
pulled
to
that out
joke
of
about that all the time with the
with
Tai
Tai Chi.
Chi.
Yeah.
Yeah, you always
That's
said that.
probably where it
So,
came from too. But yeah, I just pulled that out of thin air to imply that it does take some time, but definitely
I
not 10
was
years,
reassured by
maybe.
the 10 years.
What's that?
I was reassured by the 10 years, thinking we're 5 years in. Imagine how good it's going to feel in 5 years, another 5 years.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we kind of talked about intention and will, and as we continue to practice it, and remember that hydrostasy is remembering a point of attention all the time. So we really start to change some of the way we talk about things, because the stuff won't keep coming up because we're aware of our attention and where we put it and what we're doing with it. So I do have a goal. Nothing wrong with goals. That's okay. I do have a plan. There's nothing wrong with plans. Plans help you get to your goals within a logical, framework. That's okay. But there's always something about that plan that's leading towards that goal that is right now, even if that's just relax. You don't have anything to do right now, so just enjoy your moment and be, So when we get to the end of this practice, I start to offer just principles to help a person with the rest of their practice, because the practice is the rest of your life. So what do we do with this practice later? The principles, the abstract principles, will help a person. So for example, we talk about desire, and we've been talking about that for most of this class today, because desire, intention, and will. I could ask anybody in this group, but think of some of your desires. How many of those desires are directly influenced or directly impacted or directly proportional or directly correlate to the island of the practical, the physical, the known? Jobs, other people, things, stuff, physical. Maybe you want to lose weight. Maybe you want to gain weight. Maybe you want more wrinkles. Maybe you want less wrinkles. I don't know. Maybe you want more gray. Maybe you want less gray. I don't know. All of that's physical. That's all the island of the practical. How many of your desires are island of the practical? And then let's take it away from you all. How much desire is island of the practical in the average mind, the common mind? That's not a derogatory term. That's a statistical number. Most people are not practicing this, so that's just the way it is. Almost all of them. I want a new job. I want success. I want more money. I want safety. I want security for my family. These aren't bad. Again, so I'm not chastising these goals necessarily. I'm not throwing that out with everything else. I'm just saying that is an indication of something. It's an indication of imbalance. And one of the things, and we talked about this on Tuesday, that this hydrostasy practice will do is it will balance the abstract with the literal. And abstract, I don't mean abstract ideology. When I talk about that, I mean that we're putting it in somewhere in our mind and then forgetting about it. And then it just kind of fades. I love everybody. Are you sure? That's an abstract statement. Maybe you're just feeling love for the species in general. That's all good, but let's just cut the bullshit here and say what we mean. So because the mind is so focused on thought and on physical and on matter, physical matter, all the desires are coming from that lens of perception. But we have this whole other aspect to the human species, which is suffocated. People talk about spiritual. Do you feel it now? What do you mean, Ernest? You're talking about spirituality. You're talking about the unseen. Do you feel the unseen as you talk about it in this moment? Then your spirituality is an abstract ideological concept. If you're feeling the unseen, if you're feeling that connection, that one way to talk about it, we talk about the artist's edge. And the way that I talk about the artist's edge is, what's the other way that I describe that, Shayna? I think it's the abstract quality of the present moment. You're seeing a quality to it. And photographers can find the quality, that quality moment in everything, even in tragedy. We've seen so many photos that just speak so much emotion and energy, and it was coming from a tragic scene. It was the way that they took the picture, how they captured the totality of the moment. Totality, I'm using that in air quotes. More total. You're getting more from that one picture because they took it through the lens of the artist's edge, through a balance between the seen and the unseen. And in that unseen, that's feeling. We feel that. We can't think about it. We're getting farther away from reason and words. We can use words to hopefully direct towards the feeling. That's what we do with art. So taking this conversation that Jerry started with intention and desire and will, is really just about intention. When we really get into the hydrostasy practice, towards the end of the practice, we start to balance our desires between the abstract, and I mean that like abstract happening now, such as the timeless nature of infinity. Do you feel that? I talk about the ignition point with Donna. She likes the word luminosity. But there's a reason that the ancients came to the conclusion that everything is connected and everything is a lot, because you can feel it. When you get out of your own way, when the mind isn't interfering, you can start to feel that connection that you have to everything else. Is that in your goals? How many of your goals are in that abstract, unseen area? I'll give you an example of one of mine, freedom. Now, the way that I use the word freedom doesn't mean I'm allowed to. That's how people use the word freedom, being allowed to. Am I allowed to travel? Now I have the freedom to travel. Am I allowed to buy whatever I want? Then I have financial freedom. Am I allowed to go to the bars in the middle of an epidemic and a pandemic type crisis? That's how people are equating the word freedom. The way that I equate the word freedom is the ability to have or not have and still feel free. Do you feel free? That is an abstract goal. That's one of the abstract desires that I have, is to always feel that sense of freedom. That's my desire. That's my goal. And that's not a part of the physical. It has absolutely nothing to do with the physical, in fact. Can I be entertained and not entertained and still feel free? Can I have a goal and a plan and a desire, or not have the goal and the plan and the desire and still feel free? That element is missing for many, many people. And sometimes things like Anthony Robbins will lead you smack dab in the middle of obsession and imbalance. And they're not taking responsibility for that, for whatever reason. I don't know the reason. Maybe they don't know, maybe they don't care, maybe they don't look at it this way. Who knows? I have taken responsibility for the practice, which is why I'll only talk about behavioral change after a person has learned to maintain at least one point of attention all day long. Because then we're starting to create some significant space in the overall amount of thought. I don't like saying the term shut off thinking, because as Donna would point out, we don't really stop doing it something, we just do other things more. But just for argument's sake, just for talking, do you have the ability to shut thought off at will for a significant amount of time? If the answer is yes, then we can start to talk about hunting power and the abstract principles. If the answer is no, it doesn't make any fucking difference whatsoever. We'll just be talking, so you can either forget or remember, and we'll just keep talking. And that's not the point. So, and I flash forward a little bit, and I've taken, Jerry's initial comment, and I'm kind of, how does that look in the lens of the entire practice? When we get to the later portions of hydrostasy, you'll notice that some of your desires, and what do we know about intention? It will be directly proportional to desire, whether it's known or unknown, it will be, whether you're aware of the desire or not. But towards the end of the practice, and it doesn't end, the practice never ends, we just get to a certain point where we're doing something different. We're feeling our lives more than thinking about it. We're able to shut internal dialogue off at will. We're able to connect and deliberately modulate and sense our energy, and we're able to shift our lens of perception when it's necessary to adapt. We're able to do all of those things if we're talking about the hydrostasy practice. And then before you know it, the desire and then the intention, which was Jerry's question, how do we set intention? It sets itself through personal power, through energy, through a clear lens of perception. You don't have to set intention anymore, because you already are aware of the desire. The intention is this is an energy, loop. It's the way it's going to go. If your desire is clear, your intention will be clear, and your power of will be clear. And they'll be overlapping, and it will equal just do energy. And before you know it, you're just doing whatever the fuck you want, how you want to do it. And in this practice, at least half of your desires in the beginning, if eventually maybe all of your desires, will be on that abstract side of things, feeling. And not feeling like, oh, if I get this cup, I'm going to have a certain feeling. That's not freedom. That's not what I'm talking about. It's abstract. It's behind the scenes. It has nothing to do with the physical, but yet it is underlining all of the physical. We talk about Michael, remember we would talk about Shavasana, we would talk about silence behind the sound, we would talk about the empty space behind the object. Where is that in this moment? Are you aware of it or are you not? If you are, you could be practicing hydrostasy, because now you're splitting your cognition with the unseen, the underlining aspect of the present moment and the physical at the same time. That was quick. Raining? Yeah. Jerry, you had your hand up for a moment. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. You
Okay.
did. And I don't know if this is no, it's not an anomaly, but maybe that's part of the practice. The way you just described abstract, I can't think for myself right now one desire I have that's in the island of the practical. They're all abstract based on the way you described it just now. And that was my question, is how you're defining abstract. So if I understood that, I don't have any island of the practical ones. They're all abstract.
Mhm. The way that I would define the abstract is the unseen aspect of the human experience. Remember how we talked about the rings of power? The abstract is in that third ring, the unknown. And we can access the unknown, and there's like a bridge, and we can bring the unknown to the known through feeling. We feel it. That's how we take the unknown to the known. So you're,
I just feeling the moment. Like you were talking earlier about island of the practical desires, new job, bigger home. I guess I just always had this knowing that when I take care of my mind
Mhm.
and manage those things, everything else that's the real freedom. That's the real peace. That's all I got to do is just mind management, get out of my way. That's my deepest desire. Yeah.
And that's the act of alignment. So that's the sixth pillar.
That's how it all fits together.
That's how it all fits together. And then through the act of alignment, you're adapting to your challenges. One of the abstract principles is to look at challenges as an opportunity. Every single challenge in your life is an opportunity to accumulate personal power through intention and will. There'll come a certain point where we no longer look at challenges as like, poor me. Why is this happening to me? Things me. That shit gets old. It's just happening. It's cause and effect. We're interacting with other minds, other human beings with free will. And the balls cannot be predicted on the billiard table at that point. It's not just simple cause and effect, because we have a bunch of minds involved. It doesn't annoy me like it used to. It did annoy me for a little while, but when people would talk about law of attraction that way, I saw an asshole today. Well, you attracted that asshole. No, I'm in a city with 3 million people, and every now and then I'm going to see an asshole. Like, just stop. Did I have an emotional reaction? No. So I just saw what I saw. I also saw a person struggling and trying to be better, but yeah.
I like that point. I've heard that so much.
It's just a misunderstanding of attraction. It's
Yes.
because of the word attraction that people get so slipped up on stuff like that. It's a huge misunderstanding.
They hear a concept and then they use deductive reasoning to apply it to every circumstance, and that's not how it works.
You mean like quantum entanglement? Yeah. Or even the word quanta. Quanta basically means below the level of perception. Like, you would never be able to perceive quanta. That's why it's called quanta. So if you're trying to interact with quanta to change how it doesn't, that none of this makes any sense.
But weren't you the one that introduced quantum entanglement to us like years
We can talk
ago?
about
Was that the term?
No, yeah, we could
I
talk
remember you bringing
about
that up years ago.
well, but I don't take, so what Donna was talking about is when somebody takes a concept and then they try to apply it to things that don't necessarily apply. So when I talk about quantum entanglement, I use it in the way that I think people may have originally wanted to use it, in that attention is interacting with the environment. and that attention is a thing. It's, you know, it's something, it is a part of the unseen, but it's like breath, shadows. It has an element of seen and unseen. It's in this weird in between that we can access. But one of the interesting things about the human experience is that there's an aspect to us that is unseen. And that aspect to us that is unseen can interact with other aspects of the world and of the universe that is unseen. How does that happen? I don't know. I don't know if it's something in our brain or our body, or it's a combination of all three working together. That stuff is still in the unknown category for me. I don't have all those answers. I don't know, but I can tell you from time immemorial that human beings have always believed that there is a connection between seen and unseen.
It's on the island of the possible.
Oh, definitely on the island of the possible, for sure. Actually, no, things that I put on the island of the possible are, I'm not sure, it could be, might not be. I know that I can feel the unseen. Like, I know that. That's inner guru. I know that. That's in the island of I know. Personal power. Which is why I'm not going around trying to convince people, because I already know. I'm good.
So you were saying you don't know how,
I don't know how it works.
right?
Yeah. I don't know like I know how I'm able to see to a certain extent, right? Like I know how I'm able to perceive my physical environment, because we can use the physical to analyze the physical. The only way that we can analyze the unseen is with the unseen. And so it bypasses words and understanding and descriptions and all of that.
Except that I think that it's occurring at the same time as when you're observing the scene. So I think it
Oh,
all
yeah.
exists simultaneously.
You know,
It's kind of like the principle, it's kind of like the idea of you were talking about when you're walking through the city, how you can see the city in the past before it was what it is, and in the future, you know, way into the past and way into the future, and how that's existing, but you're still in this present moment. You haven't drifted out of the present moment by being able to see that. It's
Right.
something that's happening simultaneously.
right.
Yeah, I think that's how perception works. That's how our energy works. I think even our breath and heartbeat are connected to lots of other things.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. What we see, how we perceive, it's all much more than we understand the dynamics of how, the mechanics of how it works.
And I view an error in trying to make the unseen seen, or trying to make the unseen understandable through seen terms. And that's where we end up with religion, mysticism, people telling me that I chose to come here before I was a human being. And I'm like, well, how the fuck do you know that? And why are you telling me? Like, why don't you just go believe what you believe and believe what you believe? Why are you trying to convince me that I came here and I chose to be here and I was a Alpha Centaurian? Like, even if all that shit's true, how does that impact my present moment now? What are you doing with that influences your present moment, the direction of your attention, and the evolution of your consciousness? Evolution through adaptation. Does this make you more adaptable in the present moment, or is it just more abstract ideological nonsense? That could be true, but it doesn't make any fucking
I was
difference.
just gonna say Alpha Centauri. I knew you were gonna say that.
You knew I was going to say Alpha Centauri? Yeah. I've probably used Alpha Centauri as an example. Pleiadians.
One of my examples is that I don't know, I catch myself every once in a while. I just said it while listening to you and Donna. I mean, I don't understand the whole light switch electrical thing, but I use it every day, so I don't need to try to figure it all out.
And that's the error. So you can figure out a light switch to a certain extent because it's physical on physical. So you can use words. We can use words to describe the physical. That's all good. But where people make error is they try to describe the non-physical. And the Tao Te Ching tried to prevent that by saying the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. We can talk about the manifestations, but stop talking about it. And that's one of the things that the bridge system, I've learned, and the bridge system doesn't do that. That's why we end up with abstract principles to help you keep you in the abstract, not more explanations trying to understand, because it doesn't matter. Like you said, Jerry, the electricity is going, what's going to happen, the result. You don't necessarily need to understand unless you're interested, because you just love electricity and how things work. That could be true for some people depending on their temperament and what they're interested in, but ultimately there's no, there's no, what's that?
Sorry, I was trying to shut up so you could finish.
No, you're good. But ultimately, with the unknown, which is the third ring of power, we're not trying to understand it. And any level of it works differently. So with the physical, this is good. With the physical world, we can go information and then experience, right? Our own experience and the experience of others. When it comes to the unknown, we experience it. And then every now and then we can try to translate it into some words to communicate information. Does that make sense? But it's not always translatable that way, and it's not necessary to translate it that way.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
But it is also the error that a lot of people make, and that's why they end up selling spirituality and all of these different things, because they're trying so hard to explain the unknown. And I know that's an error when I look at it and I don't see it affecting their life. Where is that now? What effect is it? Where is your mind? Somebody told me that they're in a new awareness. I'm like, really, where is it? Where is this new awareness? How is it affecting your present moment? Where is your attention? Where is your thinking? What has really changed? Can you tell me that? My awareness has changed. What are you talking about? Like, that doesn't answer my question. You're just saying the same thing. That's not an answer to the question. Your awareness has changed. What do you mean? Where is your awareness? What has changed? How does that affect you in the present moment? What is different? Input, output, what? Nothing, because it's just an abstract ideological concept sitting in the back of their mind.
Could that be answered like level of presence?
What's that, Michael?
Like level of presence has changed? Level of presence.
Level of presence? I don't look at it that way. One of the most erroneous ways that people look at things is in absolute terms, like you have to be fully present. The fuck does that mean? Well, how am I fully, what does that mean? Right?
Actually,
You have attention. So where is your attention? Right? So when we talk about presence, we're being very specific. Your attention is either shining on the present moment deliberately, intentionally, and willfully, or it's not. That's why we use the word active recognition. So the bottom line is that this practice will stop. I can show you how to connect. I can show you through the practice. I tell you what to do with your attention, and that will help set things up so that eventually when you get to the hydrostasy practice, it's going to be easier. You'll be able to do it better, and you can divide your attention. And I call that the second attention, rather than alternating attention, which is what we've been doing. And I did borrow that term from Don Juan just for plagiarism and stuff like that. I borrowed that term, but the way that I use it is different. But I call it the second attention because we can eventually divide our attention on physical and non-physical. And what does that equal? Balance. All of my desires are no longer just physical. All of my attention is no longer just physical. My interaction with the world and with the universe is not just physical. It never was, because we're always unseen as well as seen. But now I've learned to access the unseen. I can collaborate with the unseen. I don't control it. I don't necessarily understand it, but I can feel it, and we can all feel it. And so what this practice does is it establishes the ability by clearing the thought, and that allows the energy to flow, and that flow can be felt. Just like in hydrostasy, one of the first steps of hydrostasy after establishing your 4 directions of attention. So that's a big part of hydrostasy. Eventually, we learn to maintain 4 directions simultaneously. And that will clear your mind. Pay attention to that now. Now that your mind is clear and it feels like clarity, like it feels like things are gone. It feels lighter. It feels like there's room in here now. Now pay attention to that, and that will gain space. And as that gains space, you have no more problems. You may have challenges. Maybe it's raining. Maybe the basement flooded. Maybe space junk is falling from the sky. That challenge is an opportunity for you to accumulate personal power. And that is actually very similar to Don Juan's Warrior's Way, where a person can no longer look at the world as it's doing this to me or it's doing that to me. Everything that is a challenge is an opportunity. And it's just that simple. It's not good or bad. It's not plus or minus.
It's just something happening now.
It's just something happening now. And there's nothing that we can do, but at a certain point, death touches us all. And so if you were doing everything you could up to that point, you did everything you could up to that point. And maybe space junk did fall from the sky and it gotcha. It is what it is. I think that something different happens, and I don't know what, but when we are balanced like that, I think it's really important to transition to something new in a very balanced state, accessing the unseen and the unknown. I think that that is important.
I don't know how important it is, but I know that I've been in the presence of it. I've been in presence of transition lots of times. I mean, more than the average person. And I know that when I felt in extreme distress, pain, physical stuff, I thought about that. I thought about, okay, well, what are you freaking out about? Like, what are you freaking, like, that you might die? Is that what you're freaking out about? Because if you're gonna die, is this really, do you really want to go out freaking out? I don't want to spend my living moments freaking out. It's just not a fun place to be. So why would I want to spend my transitional moments freaking out? That's such a it's only going to happen to me one time. I don't want to miss that moment. I want to choose. I want to be as deliberate with those moments as I am with my living ones. What's the difference? So and that happened without a lot of words. Where's this thought coming from? It's coming from a place of conditioning, habit, panic, death is bad, scary, whatever. Just, it doesn't have to be any of that. So what are you doing? Just, it's just let it unfold. Where are your feet? Where's your breath? What are you doing with this moment? What is there to appreciate in this moment? Not what can I feel good about, lollipops and roses. Just find something to appreciate. Find the quality of the things around you and your body and its response, and I don't know, whatever. Just go back to your practice.
Let that be a lesson. When you're about to die, go back to your practice.
Oh, yes.
And you're living every moment until you're not. So, what is this practice about? Is how you want to spend your 1440. So whatever is happening now, whether it's the flood or, it's funny because you said you were talking about freedom, and I've had COVID and I've been testing, I have a construct of responsibility that I feel as a nurse and as exposing other people, no matter what the CDC is saying. I tend to restrict my contact with other people because I feel responsible for that, and I'm fine with it. So I was testing so that I could test negative before I went to the supermarket or whatever I was going to do. And I wasn't testing negative. I kept testing positive. And it was like, okay, so then back back to whatever I was going to do in my house. And my family's been checking in on me. We have a family thread on the computer, on WhatsApp. And somebody asked me, and I said, oh, I just finally tested positive this morning or last night or whatever it was. And one of my family members went, freedom, you finally got freedom. And I didn't feel not free the whole time that I was just in my house. I still went for a walk because I could go outside. But when I had the energy, most of the time I didn't have the energy, it was freezing out, but whatever. Like, I didn't go yippee COVID, but I also didn't go, why me, poor me, here's another thing, or I can't wait to get out of the house, or there's plenty of food here, it's warm. Like, what? It's just there's something happening now. What am I don't really want to, there was some discomfort, but I don't want to add to it. I just want to navigate it. So I don't know. I didn't feel that, yay, freedom. Let me run around like a crazy person because I can escape from my house now. I just didn't feel that at all. I kind of did do that though, because I was glad to have energy, and I had energy that I prefer to expend. So I was coming up with creative ways to do that at home, but it wasn't because I didn't feel unfree. I didn't feel in bondage.
After 5 years in this practice, Donna, there's no doubt in my mind you weren't doing any of those things, and neither are we. Yeah, it's all good. I get you. I get it.
One thing I would mention is that one of the final acts of this practice, as it's practiced, like you continue to do it because you're in the abstract principles, and the abstract principles keep you in the unseen and the seen. So if you look at it through the rings of power, you have balanced rings now. All the rings are balanced. Your cognition is now a ring of power. It's no longer a trap. You've gotten so far away from that we can't consider it that anymore. You're very likely don't go back to these patterns. And to tie it into what Donna just said, this is a requirement for what I call an impeccable act of intent. So an impeccable act of intent requires, first, the requirement for an impeccable act of intent is the feeling of freedom. If it is an obsession, then that's not the same. That's not what we're talking about, right? If you feel that you have to, or you're just going to be incomplete and, you know, all of that bullshit, then it's not an impeccable act of intent. An impeccable act of intent, the way that I'm using that phrase, is when we can or not and still feel free, but we just go ahead and do it. Does that make sense? And that could be anything. That could be, Michael, that could be a company type of thing. It could be job related. It could be business related. It could be whatever you want to do, but you don't have to, but you can. And so you do, with personal power only. And then it looks like if there's a plan, it's a plan that's in balance. You're not restricted, right? You have a plan, you're willing to change your plan, and so I would just say you are supremely adaptable. If you have a plan, it's an adaptable plan. If you have a goal, it's an adaptable goal. Everything will come down to your personal power in the present moment though. So if you have a goal of, I don't know, what is a goal? Maybe you want to get a really good job, right? So your good job is I have a friend that wants to do, what is that? He wants to be a sports agent. So he wants to represent athletes and be their agent. He's taught law and he's taught political science at a university for years and years and years and years. He's ready to retire, and that's what he wants to do in his retirement. That's his goal. I don't evaluate his goal. I don't know anything about him. I don't know his mind. I don't know if it's intelligent. I have no idea. That's not my place. I'd have to follow him around, and I would only make that distinction if he asked me to. Otherwise, that's a waste of my cognition. I would never think about that, right? Kind of to what Jerry said one day, what people do is what people, I don't need to think about that. Because especially in terms of the practice, because I've offered the practice in the most responsible way that I know how. So that's my intent. But so in this imaginary scenario, there is a desire Fine. Maybe there's going to be a plan involved. Fine. Maybe there's going to be steps that we have to take, things that we have to do. So we have some planning, we have goals, we have all of these extra things. And if it is just an act of pure intent because you can, that is an impeccable act of intent. But that requires freedom. And so we have to do this practice first before we get to the impeccable act of intent. And then because the impeccable act of intent is impeccable because it's just due energy.
Sometimes there's not a plan. It just unfolds
doesn't
in the
have to be.
moment.
Yeah, there doesn't have
Yeah.
to be. See, but that is the
Oh,
freedom. The freedom to
yeah.
have a plan or not have a plan and still feel free. You know how some people, they want to be completely spontaneous. Well, I don't know. Do we feel like we have to do that? If we feel like we have to be spontaneous, then we're not really free, are we?
No.
And if we feel that we need a plan, like we absolutely have to have this plan, we're not free, are we? And if we're not free, we can't ride the wings of personal power in the same way.
Yeah.
Any questions about any of that? So I have some things, and I have a plan, and I have a goal, and I have a desire, and I could not do any of it, and I will still feel free. That's how I know that I'm getting closer to acts of impeccable intent. Impeccable implies non-resistance. Does that make sense? Imagine approaching all of your goals and desires with focus, with personal power. You know you can do it with just due energy. Won't you still get shit done? Of course. You're just going to do it without all of the bullshit.
I see that a lot clearer now.
And because we live in a world with other human beings who also have free will or free intent, free attention, you know, they can put it where they want if they desire. Sometimes our plans won't come to fruition no matter what we do. And if we're not attached to it, if we're free, then we'll recognize that and say, you know what, that was beyond my ability to directly influence. Fine, that's okay. I did my best. My intention was clear, my desire was clear, and my energy was impeccable. So that's a win. A win. I mean, we're not really keeping score, but it would be kind of like set it and forget it, but it's more like set it and then focus on what needs to be focused on now. If there's nothing, then that's just your practice. Well, it's always just your practice, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, what was it you used to say in the beginning? Oh, so long ago, you'd say, write it down, and then
Mhm.
walk away. I mean, that's what I use my notes for, so that I don't have to think about it anymore. I write it down
Sure.
and I walk away.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these things, what Jerry just said, I don't have to think about it anymore.
That's great. We don't need to be trying to think about everything. And then when you stop trying to describe the unknown, that's also a huge freedom. I don't need to. Why do I need to describe the unknown? There's only so much information that I'm going to be able to provide anyway. The unknown requires personal experience.
Exactly.
All right. Any questions, comments, concerns? I think that's a good roundabout discussion. Desire, intention, and will. And then, so I am probably going to have to put the hydrostasy book into 3 different books. One of them is The Gates of Seeing, and that's very procedural. And then the second is Hunting Power. I might not make that publicly available. I might write it and I will issue it to a person. So I might do that because I have to take responsibility for the hunting power. Because if a person's not ready, it could equal a hard crash. Does that make sense? And I don't want to set a person up for that type of thing. And the abstract principles, I could release that, but it's not going to make any bit of difference if a person isn't doing it. So you can't misuse the abstract principles. The first abstract principle is to find that feeling, that abstract, whatever it is, and stay there. Whether it's that luminosity, whether it's the silence behind the sound. So why do you think in Qigong, we start with focusing on shadows, reflections, breath, smoothness of breath specifically, because those are the in-betweens, physical and non-physical. So those are great points of attention to help set up your hydrostasy practice. So if you're doing your Qigong checklist, did you start the moment you woke up? Do you have an object of power? Do you have your quote card? Do you have so 2 different cards that we carry with us, and it can be on a piece of paper. I'm not, you could put it on your phone, although I don't recommend it. But do you have your toolbox for the day? What points of attention are you doing today? If you're doing Qigong practice in the beginning, then you're going to have shadows, you're going to have reflections, you're going to have peripheral vision, you're going to have breaking the horizon, you're going to have something specifically on your skin for tactile touch, you're going to approach eating in a very mindful, deliberate way, putting down the fork in between bites and really sensing into the flavors. And we do a little bit of self-talk. Talk out the practice. Where are your feet? Where are your hands? Or do you even know? So these are all things. Do you have reminders set up for today? What are your reminders? Are people reminding you? Do you have objects to remind you? Do you have things in your environment that will remind you? If the answer is no, then you're not doing the Qigong practice. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're doing some, a little bit of bridge. I don't know. I have no idea. So that's the difference between bridge and Qigong, is that Qigong is my specific way of guiding a person through this practice. And you can either do it or not do it. But if you do it, it will help set up the abstract to where we get into that hydrostasy bubble. And in the hydrostasy bubble, you are interacting with the physical, but you are simultaneously, the second attention, at all times, interacting with the non-physical. At all times. Okay, so that's a kind of foreshadows the Qigong book as well, because that's what the Qigong book points out. You have visual, actually you have one of the directions of attention, which is exterior. So we're going to listen behind us. That's one of them. Differentiating sounds, not good or bad, but one of the ways I like to differentiate sounds are nature and human sounds. A car door closing, that's a human sound. A bird in the tree, that's a nature sound. Neither are better or worse. I'm just differentiating for the sake of the practice. I talk it out to myself rather than thinking dumb shit. I'm thinking my practice out, and that's okay. Eventually, you won't need to do that. I get it, but it can still be a stepping stone in the practice. The sounds of the season. Each season has different sounds. Check into those. Pay attention to those. Where are those? Breaking the horizon can be broken into pieces. When you walk outside, stay cognizant above the threshold of active recognition of the sky at all times when you're outdoors. So, Michael, we've talked a lot about practice points. These are them. You're either doing these or you're not doing these, right? That's the practice. It's very simple. But it's not always easy. I get
The
it.
changing light of the day is when I have a lot, because it changes, it's like
Always
watching
fresh.
time-lapse photography of a flower opening.
Mhm.
It changes, like during the course of this class, the light of the day changes. And I realized I chose this place to live, this particular abode, because of the light. I have morning and afternoon light, and that matters to me. I keep the sunroof open on my car, not the air part, just the glass. My Jeep, I keep it open because the changing light of the day is one of my points of attention, and I don't think I would have chosen that early in the practice because it seemed like, and I was surprised. Sometimes I would be so absorbed in something because I was operating a lot of the time below the threshold of recognition that I would all of a sudden go, I would be like, I have to turn on a light because it's dark in the room. Like it has got, the sky has gotten dark in the time that I was working on this, and I was so narrowly focused on what I was doing that I didn't even notice, like my bubble of perception wasn't populated. I had a whole story about what I was doing in it, and it was a distraction from other points of attention. So light of day is a really good one for me. I like it.
Yep, that's a good one. I like the change of seasons through the light as well, because
Yes.
yeah, specifically paying attention to shadows. The shadow is different. It's cast a different direction as the season changes. So you can find a pole, and that's the same pole that you look at, and then you can see that throughout the year, the shadow's direction changes relative to that pole throughout the day. So at 3 o'clock every day, that shadow is going to change directions, degrees and angle every day. And why would you do that? Because you can. That's it. That's the only reason, because your mind isn't habitually used to doing it. Therefore, it is an active point of attention. It's valid. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns before we head out? I'll make sure to post this. Do I have a whiteboard? Did I make a whiteboard? I did. But we've seen this one a bunch of times. Yeah, that one's not new. All right. Any questions? Anyone? Michael, Lisa, before we head out? One-on-ones are available on Sunday if you're interested. The online one-on-one is $1 a minute, $45 for 45 minutes. Not required, but available. It's another thing. I've just set it out there. I've made it available, but I'll do something different with my time if nobody signs up. It's okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I will see everybody again on Tuesday, and then we only have another week or so before the Igong book is ready. It's ready now. I'm just kind of making another week or so, just if something else comes to me, I can add it and just make sure that it's polished. But yeah, get the Igong book, practice. Let me know how it works. Or don't. It's fine too. Okay. All right. I will see you guys on Tuesday if you can make it. Bye, everyone.
I've got one thing here.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Without being present, no choice can happen. If I am not choosing, then I am not consciously creating, but rather just creating by default. Creating by default is a condition of the common mind in our society in general. Most are not making choices, but rather operating based on conditioned thinking and behaving, much like any other mammal that does not have a more developed prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
The common mind is operating off of a pure conditioned and almost anatomical response to stimuli.
I can dig that. Yes. That makes perfect sense to me. It sounds like my writing.
That ring true?
That rings absolutely true. Yes.
Still to this day.
Absolutely. 100%.
So here's the question. This is the one that I did want to ask before, and I just thought of it after reading that paragraph. Just quickly, and I know you got to bounce. So what's the difference from knowing that, like when I think Ida commented before, and Donna was jesting about the time that we've been doing this, and I'm thinking to myself, I spent 5 years, not doing the practice, and but then I realized, I'm telling myself, I did it in many moments, but not necessarily gelling them all together in a hydrostasis, if you will, and in a new state. I was bouncing back and forth between this teaching, many other teachings that I have, right? And just like really in certain moments, yeah, real present, and in other moments, just losing it completely. So what's the difference? Practice.
What was the question?
I don't understand the question. What's the difference between what you just
What's
read
the,
and what you
what's
just
the
explained
difference
you were doing?
between knowing it and doing it?
Uh, the
And then the
difference
answer,
between the difference between knowing it and doing it is, where is the direction of your attention right now? Did you put it there
consistent.
on purpose?
Okay, and add in to take it deeper consistently
It
on
has to be
on
consistent.
regularly consistent and active in all moments type of basis in order
Absolutely
to effectuate the change.
correct.
Ernest, could you just explain right now, in basic alignment, you are forgetting most of the time. Did you just do that real quick? Because that
So,
might answer it for him.
so Michael, there's four layers
I
to the,
did that yesterday. Oh man, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just saying there's four layers to the practice. The first layer accounts for a person to forget all the time. And then you just remember sometimes. Counterbalance is that you are forgetting more than you're remembering. In warrior training, you're starting to remember more than you forget. And in hydrostasy, you are remembering all the time. Does that make sense, Mike? So that's kind of,
So it's not that you just pick a level and you decide, and then just having the information, knowing that is going to make you remember all the time. The information doesn't make you remember. It's the practice that makes you remember. So Ernest has it separated into these four categories because as you practice and how fast you go through them or not, and whether you fall into have 1 foot in one category and 1 foot in another, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you have to accumulate the practice to accumulate the personal power. So it doesn't, you have the intellectual ability to read that paragraph that you read and understand completely what it's talking about, and maybe even resonate with you because it's something that your inner guru knows to be true, or that you've had brushes with it before. But it's not going to get you any closer to it or not closer to it until you decide to embody the practice, and the practice kind of unfolds in the way that Ernest just explained. Bumpy, smooth, quick. It's not a predictable graph that's going to have an exact outcome, because it's subject to every individual person's totality, their commitment, their level of embodiment, all of those other factors.
I'm thinking. I can see how the level of thinking. That's a big one.
yeah.
You
So
can think about it more, and you can read much more books about it, and you could really
can be different.
understand it intellectually. You could even deliver it in a class, but it's not going to have much meaning to the recipients because you're not practicing it. So it's not coming from a place of authenticity, of knowing. It's coming from a place of information only. And that is all up here, which is the exact distraction that keeps us from the practice. It's kind of a catch-22.
And what you read, Michael, the common mind is operating almost all the time below the threshold of active recognition, which means they're acting on habit, conditioning. It's one or the other. This practice,
Information, data, thoughts.
but this practice, fundamentally, if you're doing it, you are above the threshold of active recognition. So it creates the change every time you're actually doing it. If you're not doing it, nothing is going to happen from it. So that's why I give you points of attention. So go out today. Where are the shadows? Where are the reflections? What is touching your skin? Or do you even know? Do you have objects of power? Where is your attention? If you're in counterbalance, are you redirecting thought? If you're in warrior training, are you just thinking about your fucking self again? Again, if you are, then you're violating a principle in warrior training, right? So we go back to the practice. So this practice is an active thing. That's why I use the word active so much. And that means happening now. Reading about it, understanding it, that gets filed into the brain. That becomes an abstract ideological concept. And that's fine, great. You understand the practice. Now go do it, because you need
Yeah,
the other elements. Yes, Shana.
it's the difference between feeling when you're doing the practice. You don't have to think about it in the words aspect. You feel it. and then you kind of translate it into your words versus like reading about it and then trying to understand it in your mind. There's a difference.
Sure, Michael, you come to class, right? So when you're sitting in class, do you feel like your practice is closer? You know, isn't there a sense of calm and peace somewhat during class? And when does that happen? It happens when we're focused, we're present, we're not distracted by thoughts or the doorbell or the bird that just flew by. We are aware of our breath, our feet on the floor, whatever, while we're here. This is a formal practice, just like going to yoga class, just like the reason why it feels different in those circumstances isn't because you have knowledge about it. It's because you're practicing something that's quieting your mind. You are deliberately focusing your attention, which is operating above the level of above the threshold of recognition. And then when you're not, and sometimes you're not, sometimes you're in class and you're thinking about dumb shit. You're thinking about your list of things to do. You're thinking about, this hip hurts and it's because when my car, I have to get that thing for my seat and whatever. If you're thinking thoughts, you don't feel the difference between the two is the feeling that you have. Is your mind quieted? Do you feel the peace? Do you feel the space of the absence of thought because you're deliberately focused and your mind is quieter? It doesn't have to be no thought, but it's quieter. My mind is quieter in class because I'm listening to Ernest. I'm listening to the questions. I've made a commitment, a practice to come here. I am aware of my breath, my feet on the floor, my shoulders up in my ears, my golden line. So this is a formal practice for me coming to class. And I feel different. So just like Shana said, there's a feeling associated with when you're doing it and when you're not doing it. You read something, it was information. It's information that describes the practice. It describes, that's what Ernest does every time we come here, right? He's just describing techniques and tools and he's describing the practice. He's not imposing, he's not casting any energy on us. The reason why we feel quieter here is because we're actually performing a practice. We are actively engaged in a practice of listening, of quieting our minds, of being aware of our body. And sometimes the cues, we're using his dialogue as substitute dialogue for the noise in our head. So it's the doing and the feeling from the doing. That's the difference between what you just read and then what you described as what happens to you during the course of a day. You have that information, but it didn't change anything unless you're practicing something. Where are your tools? I remember going, what the hell does my feet have to do with anything? What does my dantian have to do with anything? I want to understand how to get to that place. So and then until I said to myself, shut up and just do it. Do it and see what happens and see what it feels like. It's like riding a bicycle. I could read a ton of things about riding a bicycle and I may understand all the dynamics of what my body has to do. But until I get on the bike and I feel what it feels like to ride, I don't know what the balance that's required to do it. I can't even tell you now when I ride a bike what I'm doing with my body that keeps me from falling over. I don't know. There's so many things happening at once that I figured out by doing it, only by doing it and what it feels like. I don't know how else to describe it.
I feel you. I'm certainly out there doing things. I'm noticing as you're talking, I definitely do a lot of thinking in between, in and out of all the different things that I'm doing. And I'm not just sitting in my apartment listening to the Buddha and Ernest and Thomas.
I know it's not foreign to you, Mike. It's not foreign to you at all.
No, I'm not taking offense. I'm just letting you know where I'm at. I'm absolutely getting out there and experiencing. I'm noticing that inside of that thinking, sometimes it became very charged and very judgmental, outward and inward, and parents and this, and I really get hard into it, and I get into adversity. And I'm in the stage now of sort of unwinding from some of that, being real purposeful. I think Ernest was talking about focused intention and purposeful acts I've been more that way lately, and yeah, getting a bit of a snowball effect around the things that I'm actually focused on and intentional about doing. And then I'm also noticing a ton of thinking in and around that, and just in my way of being has been judgmental, highly looking at options, looking at ways, and sometimes anxious in the future, sometimes going backwards, and sometimes going based off of emotion, and yeah, just sitting with it, and then been pretty intentional about things that I'm on right now to give them a start, and to be relaxed about how they're planned out and how they'll go. So yeah, this class is resonating a lot this morning, and just recently.
Yeah. One thing you didn't mention throughout all of that are your points of attention. What are your deliberate points
A
of
lot
attention?
of trying to figure it out.
And a lot of intellectualism, honestly, Michael. It's a lot of concepts. It's a lot of, I'm aware of my intention. What does that even mean? Well, where is your awareness now? Where is your attention now? Where is your intention now? So I get all that, and I think it's fine. I think it's good that you're.
I'll just say this though, that it's right here. I think that's the difference. My intention is right here, instead of being in different.
Where is it?
thought
It's
patterns.
right here. Where is your intention? Show me.
My attention at this point, when you're here, it's attention.
Well, where's your intention?
I'm learning from this what we're on the conversation.
So intention must, in order for it to be, deliberate, it has to be directly tied to attention,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's your attention that makes something active in the present moment.
Yeah.
So if you have intention and attention in the same direction, then you're doing this practice. But if you're just thinking about, goals and reasons and, that's all fine, but it's not this practice. This if we're going to talk about intention, then it must be tied with your attention. So if I say that my intention,
I've got a slow attention on like a slow breathing like internal attention point right now that keeps me slightly detached from the conversation, so that sort of attached into my own presence while we're talking. I can feel the difference there than being all the way 2 feet in and I'm like a pup in the woods. A little bit. That's sometimes how I get. But no, I've got a couple background tricks. As I woke up this morning, I have been practicing. I do notice a difference. And I am starting with the body awareness as the first point. So I think I'm doing it. Yeah.
yeah. And then we'll get, so it sounds like you're touching on basic alignment, but then we'll have to talk about counterbalance, and that's redirecting thought. It's redirecting thought that's taking you away from your practice. And so a lot of the thoughts about this and that, and I can assure you they're all unnecessary.
Yeah,
It took a long time for me to go, is it
and-
habitual? Is it repetitive? Is it not making me feel good? That's all you need. Because you go, yeah, it's not making me feel good because when I do this, then I do that, and I know that I'm not doing this, and then I need to be doing that, and then now you're trying to problem solve. Now you're down a rabbit hole of, it's not good thought versus bad thought. It's not productive thought versus unproductive thought. It's abundance of thought versus quieting of thought. So is this habitual? Is it how many times have I thought about the intention of wanting to provide for my family? How many times have I thought about, how to solve this problem? How many times, just because I had a new thought about how to fix this, doesn't mean it's a better thought than the thought I thought before. It's just too much thinking. Then I'm not, where are my feet? Where's my breath? Can I go through this, whatever I'm navigating, this segment, and still maintain that breath and that feet on the floor? And you can feel the difference between the overall amount of thought in your head. That's what we're remembering and forgetting. Am I paying attention to that? Or am I not paying attention to that, which is now?
And
That's it.
And if you're doing that, Michael, there should be, sorry, just gonna mute for background. There should be two questions that you can always answer. The first one, where is your mind? What points of attention have you determined in advance? You said something about background. They don't need to be background. They need to be foreground. It needs to be right up front in the forefront of your cognition. If it's too far background, like that's kind of, I don't know, like eventually we do have a background, you know, we're maintaining attention all day long. A background is a way to look at it as you navigate the island of the, but no. We're talking about basic alignment. You need foreground points of attention. So if there should be two questions that you can answer, Michael, in terms of this practice and whether it's occurring or not. One, do you have predetermined points of attention that you determined in advance at the beginning of the day, or so far in advance, like an Qigong practice, because that's in a book that's predetermined for you already, or not? The answer is yes or no. And was your mind on any of them? That's an answer is yes or no. So that's the first one. And the second one is, how many times have you redirected using the rule of three today? If the answer is 0, I can almost assure you that you are nowhere near hydrostasy. You're nowhere near warrior training because you haven't counterbalanced. You haven't used your rule of three. Rule of three is 3 predetermined points of attention, including the voice of power, and then going back to 1 point of attention as we go throughout the day. So I just want to make sure that what we're talking about, Michael, is focused on the practice and what we're doing. And so everything that you're saying is fine, but you should be able to answer those 2 questions for me. If you can't, you're not doing the practice, and that's okay. I don't know what you're doing. Good luck. You know,
Sometimes having a bunch of knowledge and experience in different practices is detrimental. It's almost like too much information. When I was in the emergency room, I was practicing basic alignment and counterbalance a lot of the time, far more than I was when I had COVID in my house. Because when I had COVID in my house, it was just like I didn't feel well physically, but everything was fine. My refrigerator was full. I had a roof over my head. There weren't a lot of moving parts in my life at that moment. When I was moving and selling my house and closing on one house, and I had a lot of moving parts, boy, I was really focused on my basic alignment. The questions that Ernest just asked, the basics. I went back to basics a lot of the time because I had a lot of things I had to remember. I had to remember stuff about the movers, and I had to remember stuff about the lawyers, and I had a suitcase full of papers with me all of the time. And so there were a lot of moving parts going on. Basic alignment and counterbalance was really what I was focused on. I was nowhere near hydrostasy practice at that time. I had some personal power accumulated from my practice, but the practice itself was basic alignment, counterbalance, maybe. Sounds like you have a lot of moving parts going on in your life right now. So don't worry about hydrostasy. Don't worry about, I mean, you may have been in what you feel is further along in your practice at any given time, but it doesn't matter. None of that matters. It just matters what you're doing to stay present at this moment, and what's the lowest hanging fruit, and where's your toolbox. Did you choose them in advance? Right in front of you stuff so that you can get there easily.
does that make sense, Mike? So in this practice, let's separate everything that is an intellectual exercise. The intellectual exercise is some of the things that you were naming, you know, that you're noticing your intention, and you're noticing this, and you're noticing that. That's all cool. That's a part of this practice. We do notice a lot. That's impeccable self-awareness. That's what that will equal, you know, as we continue our Qigong practice. And that's great. So I don't want to take away from that, but we don't need to talk about it. There's very little that you and I need to communicate in regards to any of that stuff, any of that intellectualism, what you've noticed, what you've seen. I think that's great. You could talk about it if you wanted to, but it doesn't really matter in terms of the practice itself. What matters in terms of the practice itself, Michael, 2 questions. Where are your points of attention that you have determined in advance? Is your attention on any of them right now? The answer is yes or no, right? Does that make sense? Are you with me there? So you mentioned a little bit of background breath. That's cool. I like that. Did you determine that point of attention in advance, and are you going to make an effort to check into that through the rest of the day? You mentioned some background points. You weren't specific. Whatever those points of attention are they predetermined? And will you continue to check into them throughout the day? Right? That's the practice. The answer is yes or no. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, they're not predetermined, but yes, they're checked in on later in the day.
If they're not predetermined, then you're not doing this practice. Not the way that I've recommended.
Right.
Predetermine them.
They're predetermined and I'm reminded to when I see your book and when we're on the class, and I'm like, oh, I got to predetermine some points, and that's when I do
Predetermine
it.
the points of attention. Yes. Otherwise, your practice is it's not solid enough. It doesn't have the momentum enough for you to kind of
I
go throughout the
understand.
day.
It's
Yeah.
still has slight taper of reaction to it in that way. I do understand the difference.
You're more likely to hustle yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do understand. Your intention is true, pure. This is what we're gonna do, and that's where it's coming from. Yeah.
That's another note. So that first one makes sense, right? So there's two things that you need to be doing. The two questions that you should be able to answer. Number one, and it's two parts. What are your points of attention, and are you doing it? Where's your mind? Are you paying attention to them? So if you tell me that your points of attention was the shadows today, well, are you paying attention to them? No. Okay, well, why not? Like, that's the practice. The practice is to pay attention to shadows as often as you can remember throughout the day, because that was your predetermined point of attention. So that part makes sense, right, Mike? And in terms of the practice, that's all I want to talk about. I don't need to talk about you setting intention and, your understandings and the things that you're realizing and what you're learning. I don't care about any of that, to be perfectly honest. It's cool. We could talk about it sometime sitting on lake, shooting the shit if you want to, but has nothing to do with your practice. That's intellectualism. That's thinking. That's creating psychological time. We don't need any of it. Not for the practice. I'm not saying that it's bad or anything, but does that part make sense, Mike? Predetermined points of attention, you're either paying attention to them or you're not.
Yeah.
How many times have you counterbalanced using the rule of three? That should be the second question that you can answer for me. Maybe not a specific number, but you would either say that, yes, I've done it a bunch of times today, or I haven't. Given what you've told me so far, you should be counterbalancing using the rule of three about 1,000 times a day, if not more.
Well, give me an example of the counterbalancing in the morning, early, like before. What time is it here? Before
Counterbalancing is at any time of the day. You are identifying that you are going down a cognitive path. Donna gave it to you. Is it repetitive? Is it habitual? Is it not making you feel well? Is it trying to figure it out? Is it comparing and contrasting?
No, but early, I'm saying at 7 a.m. before, 6 a.m. before, you're doing that a lot. When it's real early in the morning.
Well,
you're saying first one?
If you're doing your practice early in the morning, then you're establishing your points of attention the second you wake up. You're using mantras the second you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll still need to counterbalance. I don't know what time in the morning you'll need to counterbalance. It could be the second you wake up. The second you wake up, you could start thinking stupid shit. Repetitive, habitual thoughts that aren't going to make you need to counterbalance the second you wake up then in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, as of this morning, been on this class for a while, this talk for a while, I've been thinking so much dumb shit. I'm checking out where I would need to counterbalance in.
You would use the counterbalance anytime that your thought is repetitive, habitual, or not making you feel well. And trust me, the vast majority of your thoughts you've already thought before. Does that make sense, Michael? All of those thoughts must be redirected using the rule of three.
Yeah, got it.
If you start thinking about where you're at in the practice, redirect using the rule of three. If you start thinking about what you want in your goals in the future and how you're collaborating and, things are coming, redirect using the rule of three. You're losing your point of attention on the present moment to think all that stuff. And they're not good thoughts or bad thoughts or plus thoughts or minus thoughts. As Donna pointed out, it's the volume of thinking. We have to create gaps in the overall volume of thought. You must redirect in order to maintain a point of attention. You get that, right? That's the reason you're redirecting, is so that you can maintain the point of attention. How do you plan to maintain a point of attention if you don't redirect? Does that make sense? So you've woken up in the morning, you've established your points of attention, and the moment you notice your mind going away from those, redirect back to the rule of three, back to the practice.
Remember the rule of three, Michael? It's an internal point of attention, an external point of attention, voice of power. It's kind of like a tripod on a stool, you know, for balance. So if you've got, I don't know, your internal, you spoke about breath. So if breath is your internal point of attention, and then your external point of attention could be shadows. I don't know which one you chose, but it's, but when you have an overall volume of thought, you got to make them right in your face, easy. Where are my feet? Where's my breath? And this is just something happening now, or whatever your mantra is. Really basic.
Well,
Because you're remembering and forgetting. You're remembering and forgetting. You're either doing it or you're not. And that's especially when you've got a lot of thoughts going on, a lot of plans, and a lot of just do things that you need to just do. Otherwise, you can't determine whether it was an inspired thought or whether it's just a habitual, repetitive thought. You can't even differentiate, because you have a good concept of what is the watcher, how to watch. You're the watcher of your mind. But then what happens is you have a whole bunch of thoughts about what your mind is doing and whether that's good or bad. Or so now you have an overall volume of thought again, you know, so you can separate the watcher, which is something huge. That's a huge recognition. The common mind does not even realize that there's a differentiation there. They're just pinball machines, you know, pinballs in a pinball machine. So you've got that down, but you're still looking for a better way to think. And it's not about a better way to think. You already have all that information. You don't need it.
you don't need
already
any
have
more
the heart,
information.
you already have the mind, you already have the ability, you already have all of that. So you don't have to think about it anymore. What you want to do is think less. You know? Those 3 points, the rule of three, where's my internal point of attention? Where's my external point of attention? My breath, my quote card. That's it. Just do that.
Where is
You
my mind?
You forget it, or you remember it and you forget it. And the rest of it comes because you're doing that, not the other way around. I know I forget that too when I get, you know, I forget that when I get caught up in a better way of thinking or a good problem solver. I'm a good problem solver. I need to think about it more. I need a greater understanding of my mind. You don't need a greater understanding of your mind. You need a greater awareness. And that happens in the quiet. It doesn't happen in more thought.
And then
The more thought you have about it, the further away you get from it.
And then let's just finish up with something that you can do, Michael. So otherwise we're just going to get too lost in words. So Michael, have you ever led a yoga class or a group of people in yoga?
Yeah.
When you lead somebody, are you very descriptive? Do you kind of talk it out and tell them what to do with their mind and their body?
Cueing? Yeah. Like the cueing?
You cue them, right? Yeah. When you do your own yoga practice, do you cue yourself? Do you talk to yourself in the same way that you talk other people through their practice? If you were,
Good question.
the answer is likely no.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I knew that. So the bigger question is why not? And moreover, I prescribe in Qigong to talk out your practice to yourself. You want a greater understanding, talk out your practice as you do it, and you'll understand it even more as you do it, because it's tied to the present moment. So when you're going throughout your day, ask yourself, where is my point of attention? What are my objects of power? Why am I doing this? What is occurring right now? Am I redirecting? Is this a part of
Or
my practice?
here is my breath, not the whys and the and am I and what am I doing instead? Here's my breath. Oh, here it is. Just realizing that you forgot is enough, because that means you're remembering. So talk out the practice, the actual practice. Here is my breath. Here is my mind. Here is my point of attention. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is.
Yeah. So that's all that, so talking out the practice and using your logic, there's ways that logic can point back to the practice. Is this thought benefiting me? Is this thought repetitive? Is it habitual? You know the answer to these questions typically very fast, but talk out your practice as if you were teaching somebody, right? Do your yoga practice, talk yourself through your own yoga practice the way that you would talk a person through theirs. When people do guided meditations, do you do your meditation the way that you guide people through theirs? Why not? It doesn't make any sense. So talk out your practice the way that you would want to teach it to somebody, just like you do your yoga the way that you would instruct somebody else in yoga. Does that make sense, Michael? So the final thing I'm telling you today is to talk out the practice to get a greater understanding of it as you're doing it. If there's questions and things like that, logic is the best question poser. The best way to pose questions is through logical deduction. Is this a form of interference? It's a rhetorical question. It's not trying to understand. It's rhetorical. You know damn well it is, but asking yourself that question is kind of puts it up on a pedestal. You can see it. And then it is a part of your practice. It's a part of the redirection. It's a part of the recognition. Talk out your practice as if you were teaching it to somebody else while you do it. Does that make sense? And that's the last practice point, so that will stick. We want that one to stick. Cue yourself. Hell yeah. That makes sense.
And then that keeps the watcher in place. That keeps the
use the watcher. Don't ever think that you're going to be just the watcher.
No.
That's zened out. You can't live a life that's zened out, Michael. You got far too much going on.
It also keeps that in place almost.
And that can get out of balance. You don't want to be zened out. You want your zen to be superimposed over everything else that you're doing. We're balancing. We're not going to one extreme. We're not trying to get zened out. This isn't a Buddhist monastery. Okay, talk out your practice as you do it. Teach it to yourself as you do it. Just as if you were doing and it's great for you because you're a yoga teacher. You have experience teaching people in yoga, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Take your Shavasana with you while you do everything else. Be the watcher in terms of your practice. Watch yourself in terms of the practice. Go back to the practice. Does that make sense? Don't get lost in the watcher, because then all you're doing is watching. And we're not just passive observers, we're creators. So get in there and create in addition. It's in addition to, so you stay the watcher in addition to doing everything else. Does that make sense, Mike? And for anybody who's watching this could be very beneficial for their practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions, if I dropped out of the sky, that you could answer. What are your points of attention and where are they now? The answer is I don't know, or you have a specific answer for me. Number 2, how many times have you redirected? And it's not a literal, I don't need to know how many times. It's kind of, it's you're asking yourself that question because you already know that answer or you don't. You should be redirecting a lot. I'm just going to tell you right now. And then talk out your practice as you do it. If you've made shadows your points of attention, ask yourself, where are the shadows? That's a rhetorical question, right? It's not, you're not trying to find the deeper understanding of shadows. You're just saying, where are the shadows right now? Am I paying attention to them? Where are the reflections? Where are the reflections in nature or in relation to the shadows? Why is that important? Because I'm either paying attention to them or I'm not. I'm either above the threshold of active recognition or I'm below it. Okay, so let me know how all that works out on Thursday next week. Or sign up for a one-on-one and we can start doing it together. Either way. Okay, I will see you guys again on Tuesday. Otherwise, have a great rest of your night and day. Yep, see you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Yep, you're welcome. See you soon.